morning, everyone. We had a wonderful concert last evening with our dear friends visiting from Ananda village, Ram and Denise. And it was so sweet. I don't know how many of you got a chance to share with us, with Ram. And I was so touched with many of the songs, but one of them particularly came to me as I was thinking about this reading, and it was, I'm going to read the words so that I don't paraphrase or misquote. This is a song called Nature Boy. I'd heard about this before, but I don't think I'd ever heard the song itself. I had read about it, that is. I'm going to read. This is written by, I don't know the name of the songwriter, but a very old song. And this person met Yogananda. And in this song, he captures that experience of what he felt. And it's a very famous song. There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very, very far over land and sea, a little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, a magic day, he passed my way, and while we spoke of many things, of fools and kings, this he said to me, the greatest thing you will ever learn is just to love and to be loved in return. It was particularly charming for me to think about that because I was obviously thinking more of the topic today and this idea of an avatar, of the descent of divine consciousness, and it references to a particular verse in the Gita and the cosmic role that all these masters play in the course of this planet, how they come here to change tides of civilization. And I was taking a walk and thinking about that, and then I heard this song in the evening, and it was so sweet because yes, Yogananda, Jesus, Krishna, they came for such a cosmic purpose to shift the consciousness of the entire planet, but also they came for each one of us, just for that message of that song, to take visible form, to touch each one of our hearts, to offer that personal experience, to teach us how to love and to just be loved in return. And this is how the avatars work. This verse from the Gita that the reading references is a very popular one. Those of us who grew up in India, that was the first Sanskrit verse I learned because I was very small, and there was this televised version of the Mahabharata that a lot of us grew up with. I was a very small boy. I don't know what year this was playing on television. I don't think I understood the story or the dialogues or any of that. But there was this beautiful title track, and at the end of the title track, there was this image of Krishna in his cosmic form, and then Arjuna in his chariot, the battlefield of Kurukshetra. All of that is depicted, and there's this resounding sound of the conch. And then this verse is recited: whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, the divine takes visible form. He comes to destroy evil and establish righteousness again and again. It is the pivotal message of the scripture itself. It shifts the whole story when you think about it. And the whole story of Mahabharata is very complex, as some of you may know. But it shifts the story when you realize that God incarnated. Krishna played a role, and he was God himself. And he was playing this drama in order to achieve a certain goal, both on the cosmic level, but also for each and every individual soul in that story. And it also makes the message so timeless, because he says, it's not just something that happened in that battlefield of Kurukshetra. I come again and again. That's the message of the scripture itself. And it is a rather tricky idea for the non-believer, let's just say. God taking visible form. What does that even mean when we say God descends into flesh? You know, we are told, the scriptures tell us that God is absolute consciousness. He pervades all of creation. That's what we learn from the Vedanta philosophy of how God is spirit, God is truth. And then we are told that God descends into a human body. How is that possible? Is it an abstract concept or a literal truth? How do we work with that? You know, what does it even mean that infinite consciousness is now going to animate one particular body? God is going to walk amongst us. He's going to talk to us. It is something that is so hard for us to conceive or to even relate with in that abstract, rational sense, but one that becomes part of our experience, just as that song was talking about in Nature Boy, you know, when you're touched in your heart And you realize the whole purpose of this descent was to teach us how to love, to learn to love. Ramakrishna, who was an avatar himself, that's what Yogananda describes. That's how Yogananda describes him in the autobiography of a yogi. He was a great teacher who lived in India in the 19th century, and Master Yogananda makes a lot of references to him in the autobiography. He often taught in parables. He would give these pity stories he would just create them and teach to his disciples. And I went back to that story because I had heard it many, many years ago of how he described that avatar. He shares this beautiful little parable. He says there were 4 men in a village. And in the middle of the village, there was this high wall. And behind that wall was this beautiful space that was enclosed, but nobody knew what was there. Nobody could find out because the wall was so high. And these 4 men were determined to find out. So they create a huge ladder, maybe by stacking one ladder on top of another. And all 4 of them one day decide to go there and climb that wall to get onto the other side to see what was there, so they would know it's no longer a mystery. And the first man starts climbing the ladder, and he goes to the top. And the 3 are watching from the bottom, this man at the top of the ladder, and he's so filled with joy and bliss, and he's laughing, and he's in ecstasy, and then he jumps onto the other side, and they never see him again. And then the second man climbs up the ladder. The same thing happens. He goes to the top of the ladder. Everybody sees him in this state of ecstasy, and then he also disappears. The same thing happens to the third man. And the fourth man climbs the ladder, knowing all of this, and then he reaches the top of the ladder, and then he beholds what's in front of him. This beautiful garden, something that his imagination could never conceive. So beautiful, so satisfying, fruits and flowers and smells and all sensations, millions of times more pleasant than anything he has ever experienced. And then he can also take in all of that, even standing at the top of the ladder. He's able to be in that joy and ecstasy while being there. And then he decides, now I cannot just disappear like the rest of them. I want to come back. I want to tell everybody in the village how beautiful this place is. I want to share the glory of this garden with everyone. Now, obviously, the story is allegorical, and it's pretty self-evident what the allegory is. These souls, they are known by different names. In Sanskrit, we call them avatars. In the Buddhist tradition, they are called bodhisattvas. They return again and again for the sake of others, with no personal agenda, with no real purpose of their own, except out of sheer compassion for all of us, for everybody else, to come back and be that channel. They come from a place, not from a physical place, but rather a place of realization and transcendence that our minds cannot comprehend, that is so far beyond anything that we can conceive. Last week, Shanti started to read from this particular section in the autobiography of a yogi on Babaji. I hope I can get the words right. Yukteswar Giri, the chapter begins by Yukteswar Giri introducing Babaji to Yogananda. He says, the spiritual stature of Babaji is beyond human comprehension. He says, the dwarfed vision of man cannot pierce his transcendental star. I think he says, men try, but in vain, to even imagine his spiritual stature. It is inconceivable for the man. And then he goes on, and there are a lot of stories he shares. And you sit with these words, we cannot but try to conceive, to comprehend. What is it that we are talking about? I was recently I was teaching meditation to a student one-on-one, and we were sitting at the altar, and the person, almost 1 hour into the class, he asked, I want to know what those pictures are. He had no idea. He had not read the autobiography of a yogi. And then I started explaining to him who these masters were, just in brief. And he said, oh, are you telling me this man, he was pointing to Yogananda at the bottom. It's not a woman? I thought, it's a woman. And then he was a little confused because I realized he had been staring at it for the last hour. So he was trying hard, but then he was saying she, even after I did clarify to him that he was a male person. And then, interestingly, that is a very common confusion. People often mistake Yogananda to be female because he has long hair and he has very soft features. And then he looked at Babaji, and then I told him he's a man too. And this man was very surprised. Really? All of them are men? Not that he was offended in any way, but he was confused because for the whole hour he had been staring at the altar, and in his own mind, not all of them were men. And interestingly, he did not even recognize Christ. So for some reason, it was a little confusing for him. But it is confusing because there is the human body, there is the human form that walks amongst us, and then we are also told, or rather, we realize that this is not just a human person. This is something so far beyond what we can understand, this consciousness that this person represents. My favorite line from the autobiography of a yogi is this line from the chapter on Babaji. Whenever again, I'm hoping I get this right, whenever anyone utters the name of Babaji with reverence, the devotee attracts to himself an instant spiritual blessing. We had a friend in Walnut Creek. Her name was Sheila. She's no longer in the body. And she used to host these wonderful gatherings of devotees in her place. And one evening, I went there to share satsang in the same way. And she is really good at bringing people together. And I remember so many of these beautiful meals around a large dining table in her home, about 20, 25 people each time we sat there. And this particular evening, I had not received the email. I'm not part of their group. I drove there just to be with them. She had asked everybody to read the autobiography of a yogi and pick their favorite line from the book. So we all sat around in a circle, and everybody was going to read their favorite line. And it was easy for me because I'd already thought about that question, although I didn't receive Sheila's email. This was my favorite line because it speaks so much to everything that the book represents for us. The vibration that Yogananda brought, it is something that we practice, we share, we understand, we go through it, we apply it in so many practical ways in our lives, but also on one level, we really don't understand. We don't understand who Babaji is. How is it possible that you could think about somebody, you could utter their name in the heart, and immediately you're in touch with that person? What kind of a consciousness is that would immediately be drawn to you just by the mere thought of it? How all-pervasive does it need to be? And also, just be contained in that one body, just almost oxymoronic. And how could we possibly try to understand, to comprehend the stature of somebody like that? Since I'm talking of Babaji, I'm reminded now of there's a place in Varanasi, and I'm sure all of you have read these stories in the autobiography of Yogi. It's from the same chapter. Babaji also has a sister. Her name is Mataji, as most of you know. And there's a story of when on the banks of the Ganges, one evening, Larry Masha goes there, and Babaji and Mataji materialize. They come as balls of light, and then I'm not going to share the whole story. It's quite fantastic. I'm sure most of you have read it. If not, it's chapter 33, I think, in Autobiography of a Yogi. And I've been to Varanasi at least a few times since I read the autobiography. And every time I go there, there are so many sacred places. It's an ancient town. It's, as they say, it's older than any legend that people share about the city itself. It's older than all the men that they talk about that lived in the city. It's so old. You will feel it as soon as you're there. And my favorite place is this place called the Shashwamedh Ghat. This is where that event happened. And I can tell you, it is not most people's favorite place. Varanasi is very, very crowded. And if you thought the town was crowded, you just have to go to the Shashwamedh Ghat. It feels like there are 20,000 people there all the time. And there are people trying to sell you things. There are people trying to take a dip in the Ganges. It's also a cremation ground. People are constantly, the bodies are coming, they're being burnt, and they're being thrown into the river. It's just total chaos. And then I remember these words from the autobiography. One of these rocks in the steps, these are steps leading up to the Ganges, one of them slid open, and then Mataji came from under there as a ball of light. And I keep sitting there wondering, which rock is it? Because the footnotes in the book says, Yogananda says, Babaji even today lives on the crags, high Himalayan crags above Badrinath. That's what he says. And then one of the footnotes says, Mataji, still today, she's meditating in ecstasy in an underground cave in Dashashwamedh Ghat. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at all this chaos and wondering, where is this cave? What if somebody just, took a shovel or removed some of these rocks and looked for Mataji? Will we find her? No, we cannot, but you cannot but wonder. You cannot but wonder, where is she? What is she doing? And how is it possible? Who are we talking about? We are talking about, people that, we anthropomorphize, we think them as human images. We think of Krishna as this boy playing a flute. No, we don't have pictures of Jesus, but still this beautiful painting that we have on the altar. We think of them as human the way they came to us. They came in flesh. And yet, these stories and what they bring to us is so beyond anything we can understand. Just a verse or two before this particular verse from the Gita, Krishna says, in an almost, again, confusing way, he says, I was never born. I was never born. I appear veiled in my own cosmic garment of Maya. And, you read the stories, and of course, Krishna was, in a way, born. He was born in the prison to Devaki and Vasudeva. There was his uncle who was trying to kill him, and then there's this whole story of how the baby is carried over. All avatars are born in a way. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and Ramakrishna was born, Yogananda was born. So what does it mean when he says, I was not born? Because they are never identified. They are never identified with that body. Their sense of realization is so high that their own consciousness never really gets condensed in that form. They're playing that role for all our sake. There's another story from the life of Ramakrishna. This is not a parable. This is actually a real story from one of his biographies where somebody recounts this incident that happened with him. There was a devotee who used to visit Ramakrishna often, and this one morning, this devotee was, there used to be a cat in his hut that often ran into the kitchen and stole food, and this man was really, angry with this cat, and one day he just decided to take a stick and beat this cat. And the cat ran away and it cried or whatever. And he went to meet Ramakrishna after that, and Ramakrishna just is sitting crouched on his seat and he's in pain. And then this man asks, what happened to you? And he says, you just beat me with a stick. My back is in pain. And what do you do with a story like that? How is that even possible? Yogananda, there's so many stories like that told even of Yogananda that Swami shares with us once. Yogananda was just sitting across from a dinner guest, and he said, you have a sour taste in your mouth. He is present in all the bodies and all our minds as much as he was in that one body. And that's the irony of what the avatar is. He is confined, he is limited in that form, and yet he is not. He is in all of us. And that's why we honor them differently. All of us in this room, we all have birthdays, and birthdays of ones that are near and dear to us. And I'm sure we celebrate them in some way, give gifts, go for dinner, or at least wish each other. But you don't make an effigy of your friend lying in a hospital bed in order to honor his birthday. But we do that for Krishna and for Jesus. We actually bring the baby and we put that in the manger, and we celebrate and we adore that baby. The same with Krishna. Every year when we honor Krishna's birthday, he's always seen as that little boy, that toddler who's crawling and who's stealing butter. And in itself, it's an important image for us to hold, because the descent of the avatar in flesh, although Krishna was never born, he appeared in his own cosmic garment of Maya. That incarnation has a specific meaning in our lives. It has, because that was purely for our sake. The avatar did not descend for any agenda or purpose of his own. He came here out of sheer compassion. And we hold that baby, we adore that form, because that descent in itself represents that crystallizing devotion that brought this infinite consciousness and confined it into that body. And then this person walked amongst us. Last year, some of us were in India, and I went to Vrindavan. I told a dear friend who is a very ardent devotee of Krishna, I'm going to Vrindavan, can I bring something for you? And she said something which is very Indian. Those of you that are Indian will understand, or even others too, because this is very familiar. But also, I don't know what to do with. She said, I don't know. What can I ask you? to bring from Vrindavan, maybe just dust from the streets where Krishna walked. And, the first thought that came to my mind was, that sounds unsanitary. I'm not going to pick dust from the streets of Vrindavan and put it in a Ziploc and carry it in my bag. I don't know. But, that is what the avatars bring for us. They sanctify this planet. They sanctify our lives. That mere presence, they have a living presence. They were never identified with the body. They were born as that baby. They walked amongst us. And one fine day, they all left, except for Babaji, who's still in his body. But their presence is not one that was ever confined in that body, which means it is not confined in time. That is why we say, even in Christmas or when we celebrate these avatars, we invite them to be born in us. That's why we celebrate their birthday, because we present that image to awaken their presence within us, because they're as much present within us as they were in that body that walked down the streets of Vrindavan as Krishna, in Jerusalem and Galilee as Jesus, and then all over the world as Yogananda and Buddha and so many other great avatars. We tune into them through that living presence, and also through that, just the dear human form that they manifested. It is not to say that it was secondary or it was trivial or irrelevant, because that was the visible form that God came to us in because of His sheer love and compassion for all of us, And He played this part, He played this role of just the human drama of seemingly suffering on the outside, but always inwardly connected to that state of communion with God. One who is with God is God Himself. That's the reading that we read last week about the infinite Christ. All these avatars, they are God descending into flesh. They are that infinite consciousness, and then they walk amongst us. They do the most mundane of things. When to think of Jesus, we have this song in the oratorio, His mission began, and it's about the wedding and where He makes wine out of water. You read that story, you see that story, and it cannot get more mundane. Here is Jesus Christ, here is God incarnate in a human body. He is with all of His disciples, and all He does is He wants to go to a wedding. And then it's a big wedding, and there are too many people, they run out of wine, and then He somehow decides to make wine out of water. They play the most mundane of dramas because we can relate to it. Then we can see in all these ways that He came for me, that He is presenting a potential that could be mine. He looks like me, but He's not. And I want that. I want that potential. That garden, this fourth man, he chose not to get into that garden as he wanted to share that glory with everybody, to inspire all of us to climb that same ladder, to think of the fact that Yogananda walked amongst us. The avatars come again and again. That is the other promise that is so important in this teaching, because we forget, we get confused, and we don't quite know exactly what Jesus was like. We can imagine, and there's televised versions of how the story might have played out, but with time things get lost. And so He has to come again and again. He has to come as Yogananda, and then we have an image. Not just pictures, we have videos of Yogananda. We have His voice recorded on audio. We have all the writings that He left for us. And more importantly, and most importantly of all, He magnetized disciples. He made them carriers of that living vibration. All of us are that living carriers of the vibration of the avatar. Just to think about that, just to think about who they are, what this consciousness is that actually manifested in form, just to even meditate on that one line from the autobiography of a yogi. Whenever anyone utters the name of Babaji, with reverence, the devotee attracts to himself an instant spiritual blessing. You read that, and one cannot but wonder, what else would I do? What else would I do right now except call upon Babaji? Just keep inviting that presence into my life to those that received Him. To them gave He the power to become sons of God. These avatars come so that we can receive them. We can create a cradle in our hearts. We honor them as babies so we can get that message. Each year we play that same drama over and over again during Christmas time, during Krishna's birthday, so that we can remember, I want to be thinking of Babaji. I want to be uttering His name in my own heart with reverence every second of every day, until I can receive him fully. God bless you.
When we need you, you descend, seeking grieving hearts to mend, by hate unaffected. You remain our friend. On a cross rejected, doomed to meet a shameful end, still with love perfected, you remain our friend.